curatorial strategies behind some of the coolest third spaces, festivals like the one we're here, please welcome to the stage the director of Ake, a globally acclaimed festival and an international acclaimed author, Lola Shoneyin. DJ Ziggie, aka Njeri Gitungo, who is a co-founder of Strictly Silk, an all-femme dance event. We've got the co-founder of Indus Conclave, a multidisciplinary conference, Mohammed Raza. We've got Nigerian chess champion and Guinness World Record holder, Tunde Onakoya. He also teaches sports to low-income families. And then Moderator, the founder and director of the Jamaica Book Festival, Latoya Blackwood.
Today is Mother's Day, right? So that's Sizzler from Jamaica celebrating Black woman and child. And I just want to say all the mothers are beautiful, right? We don't have no ugly mother in here, right? And yeah, I start with that because I'm celebrating the first space, which is my mother's womb, and then the home that she created outside of the womb, right? So big up all of the mothers today, right? So we're moving to our discussion. And of course, you heard all the superstars I have on stage with me. And we're here to talk about the third space, which the theory started out as third place. And I'm not sure if the curator did that on purpose in terms of saying space instead of place, because when you take into account things like, you know, technology and so on, it really means that it doesn't have to always be a physical space. And we'll highlight some of those things in the discussion. So I'll add a little bit more about each of my panelists, not to go long, right? Because we're going to save most of the time for the conversation. So for Njeri, you gave me permission to call you Njeri, right? You lead the Strictly Silk by Next Collective, and we're going to hear some more about that. But you're also a filmmaker and documentary maker, and it's a good segue from the last panel. Mohammed, you're coming to us from Pakistan, right? And you have the Indus Conclave, which I'm hearing about it for the first time, so I'm looking forward to hearing more. And I was interested from your bio about seeing that you also sit on boards, you know, across government, because mega burn some fire upon them today. Right? And Lola, so she's, for me, if I was to call her anything, President General. Right? Because she does run things wherever I see her in the world, like, she's already running things when I get there, right? So that's how she operates. But what's fascinating to me about what Lola is doing, and we'll talk about it more, is that apart from running Ake falls under the Book Buzz Foundation. And Lola has done some really significant things in the last few years that will contribute to the conversation about third space. For example, she's working on a project to, you know, create a hub for and train Nigerian illustrators, and they have a goal of producing 200 books. 100 books, right, illustrated by Nigerians for Nigerians to the world. So you can see that we have an incredible mix here. Tunde, oh my gosh, chess master extraordinaire, who came to Jamaica. That's a interesting story. I can't ever go into it on the panel. But what's fascinating, of course, you heard that he's a Guinness World Record, and in true Nigerian style, the original record, well, the record before him was 56 hours. And, you know, they had said, all right, I could do 58 for break the record. Guess how much he went to with the chess marathon? 60 hours. You know, just a little. Let's just add 2 more hours and do it in Times Square, right? Sound very Nigerian to me. So, as we go into our conversation, I want to start out by asking you to, maybe we can frame the conversation around what. I mean, our host introduced it, but we can go a little bit deeper. The what, the why, and the how in terms of dealing with some of the current challenges. So let's start with the what. For you, Lola, what is a third space in your space?
Hello. Thank you very much, Latoya, for that lovely introduction. Thank you to all of you for being here. And of course, thank you to my sisters, Angela and Shiro, who continue to bring me to Nairobi.
Absolutely.
I love you and I appreciate you. And this is always such a pleasure for me. So we know, we're going by Oldenburg's theory. The first space is the home.
Yeah.
The second space, yeah.
Work, school, whatever.
And you have the third space. So I guess a good way to start is to look at my first experience with the third space and how it has in many ways inspired me since then. So fresh out of university at 21, I was told by a couple of lecturers that maybe I had a bit of talent with writing poetry. So as soon as I got back to Ibadan, not my home state, but where I lived at the time, I heard about the Association of Nigerian Authors. And of course, when you hear about these associations, you're a little bit wary, like, what? You know, what kind of association is this? But if I set the scene a little bit, it's the 90s, so mid-90s, coming out of military dictatorship, a bunch of authors, so from Niyi Oshundare to Femi Fatoba, to, the masters that I'd read in school and university, to find myself at these monthly gatherings where it seemed like they weren't just creatives, they were also activists. Their words, when they created and they shared their works with us, there was always that feeling that they were fighting for something. So in many ways, that was what I was born into as a creative. That's what I understood. And I felt comfortable there because although I was one of maybe a handful of women and definitely one of the youngest in the group, they never made me feel like I was like I should have been making tea for them
so
or anything
is a
like
key,
that.
Yeah.
They made me feel like my voice was important. They would encourage me. They would ask me, what are you reading today? You know, things like that, which was life-changing for a young creative who at that point probably, had no idea what she wanted to do.
Yeah.
And, from the Ibadan Arts Renaissance to Infusion in Abuja, to just constantly creating these spaces, one conviction, I just feel that it's so important for the next generation to have a little bit of what I had, because my thinking is that will inspire them to do so many things that are greater than everything that I have done.
So stick a pin right there. Yeah. I don't know if that's a Jamaican thing, but stick a pin. So we're gonna move over from that last point you made over to Mr. Big Things Come From Small Places, right? I can identify with that, coming from an island with 3 million people. Tell me about, picking up on Lola's last point, about how the work that you've done with Chessing Slums has, engendered that feeling of belonging, unlock the minds of young people regardless of their circumstances, because I think that's an important point that was raised there. So tell me about that for you.
Hello everyone. Thank you for the kind introduction. Of course, thank you to Angela for thinking a chess player can belong to a book festival. And of course to my darling Ellis for initiating me in this way. So To answer your question, let me give you a bit of a genesis of how, in finding my own third space
Right.
and understanding my place in the world, I could extend that, to the children I now advocate for, using my talent of chess. So I grew up in Lagos, Nigeria, in a small place called Ikorodu. We lived in a slum. In fact, just in front of our house was where they used to dump all the refuse in the entire community. So it was a place where nothing happened that people did not pay attention to. My parents didn't have the privilege of education, right? My mom, she was a hustler. She did everything. She sold on the streets, she sold fruit, she sold sachet water. She did everything because it was important to her that our children, me being the first child and my younger brother, could get an education. And she would always say this in Yoruba that that I want you to grow into a man that can speak amongst his peers. Because this was something that caused my mom a great deal of pain. She was brought from the village when she was 8 and to work in servitude. And she would go to the houses of, this rich women that were educated, and she would wash their clothes, do their dishes, and she would just observe them talk about their careers and their lives. And she never had that opportunity to really know what she could become. And it was something that caused her a lot of pain. So my mom made many painful sacrifices for me to be able to go to school. But something happened when I was 10. There was no money again. Things had gone from bad to worse, really worse. So I had to drop out of school. So I was at home for 2 years. In those 2 years, sometimes I'll go to the market with my mom. Some other days I'll pretend that I was sick because it was a very hectic work. So on those days, I would sneak out to this barber shop. It was just by the street side. And that was where I saw a chessboard for the very first time in my life. Of course, one beautiful thing about chess is that there's a very detailed way in which the pieces are carved that ignites curiosity in the mind of a child, right? I held up the knight and I said, "Is this a donkey?" And he said, "No, it's a knight." But then the barber wouldn't teach me to play. So I went home myself, I got a cardboard, I drew out the checkered squares, I got clay, and I molded the pieces. And I would go back to the barber shop. Whatever I saw them play, I would come and practice. Then I would teach my younger brother to play. And whatever I saw them do, I would use it to beat my brother. So I was beating my brother 1,000, and I was happy that, yes, I'm great at this game, huh? So one day, the barber told me to come play, at the table of masters. Because his friends would come around and they would play, they would banter. And I lost in 2 moves. I was like, wow. So it became my entire life mission to find how to defend checkmate in 2 moves. Then it became 5 moves. Then it became 10 moves. And after many, many months, I finally got a draw against this man that had introduced me to this wonderful world of chess. And I give him this context because it took a very long time for me to understand what chess did for me. For a 10-year-old kid in the slums of Ikorodu that knew very little of the world, chess became the safe space I could escape to, right? There were a lot of things that I couldn't control in the way that we grew up. There were many days we'll go to bed without food. And I think that is one of the real tragedies of poverty, right? Because it does rob people of their agency, and in some way, even their identities, right? Yeah. A lot of the children that we grew up together, you could see that the effect of poverty in that community was that they had become victims of their parents' poverty. They had become victims of the environment in which they were born into. So chess was the first thing that gave me a way to see the world beyond those confines, that taught me that I could be intelligent, that my ideas matter, that I could find a very simple frame to think through a complex idea and bring it to fruition by committing to a move. So all of those things started to shape the way my mind and the way I understood the world, and eventually chess gave me a way to find my place in that world. So 10 years ago, I went to school, I went to college, I went to school on a scholarship because I was good at chess. I made a decision that I was going to give other children like me that come from nothing, right, an opportunity through this lens of chess. Because by teaching them chess, it gives them a sort of like dignified way for people to perceive them, not just as children that come from extreme poverty, but children that have the capacity to do something. And when we change that lens, the children reclaim something. So that was the genesis of the idea that there are these small places in which just children are abandoned or overlooked by society. If I could teach them chess and they become masters of it, then you have to respect them for their ability to show capacity for thought. And that creates an important premise, right, for we to extend the opportunity that they deserve instead of just treating them as another charity case. Exactly. We are not defining them through that lens of charity, like what they have the capacity for. So that was the entire idea behind Chess and Slums, and it has sort of blossomed into a truly revolutionary idea.
Into 17 sites. Yeah, and he is about to open a new one at the end of this month. So really have a lot of respect and admiration for you. And a shameless plug, because we're in the book business. Samaname Books has copies of Tunde's book, which Lola published and wrote. So, you know, don't leave without a copy, right? I'm going to go and check after to make sure they're sold out. So moving from that amazing journey, Tunde, and coming over to you, Raza. And I'm saving the homegirl for last in terms of us giving her input, so don't worry. Raza, tell me about the context in Pakistan and perhaps link it to what you're doing with your organization. Good?
Can you hear me?
Yeah.
Thank you, Angela, and the organizers for having me. It's absolutely a privilege to be there in Nairobi. And to respond to what you just asked, and just to do some context setting, when we were growing up in Pakistan, when I was in high school, are you guys familiar with cricket?
Yes, Brian Lara, big up yourself.
Pakistan was supposed to host this World Cup in 2011, and I was in my economics class on a Monday of March, and I heard gunshots, and like later we found out that the Sri Lankan cricket team was attacked on its way to the cricket stadium. What that resulted in was that Pakistan was deprived of its chance to host the 2011 World Cup, and all of the entire country went into kind of a semi-lockdown state, something that we saw during COVID, the world over going through. But Pakistan, like, you could only go to your home, or you could only go to your school or your office. It was not safe to go to the markets because any place with a crowd could be a potential target for an attack. Pakistan is also a very fervently religious country, so mosques also became places that were not very safe because the terrorists were frequently attacking congregations, large congregations, anything that they could get, weddings, funerals, or congregations in religious sites. So at that point, for like a 14, 15-year-old kid who was so obsessed with cricket, to see that the World Cup is not happening, and people, and then I used to debate, so we used to go to these international tournaments, and I used to have a phone, like a BlackBerry, and people used to be so shocked.
That's a throwback, wow.
Yeah, and people, like, I remember people just being, like, oh, do they have Blackberries in Pakistan? Like, like they just thought we lived on camels and, were people from the Middle Ages. So it was kind of that, okay, there was Pakistan was kind of disconnected from the entire world because people couldn't come in because of very valid security reasons.
Right.
And Pakistan also became kind of a pariah that, okay, if you're traveling from Pakistan, you might be a terrorist, so we wouldn't give you visas. So in that sense, like when I used to go to these conferences, I would see the world coming together, people from different parts of the world, and it kind of became an escape. So more than this desire for public speaking, I would just go to these conferences, these model UN conferences all over the world, and just be like, okay, I'm just a part of, like, it would give me an assurance that I'm a part of the world. And then later on, when slightly things got better, I went to this literary festival in Lahore in 2012, I remember. And which was, the biggest thing about it was that it was a conference where white people were coming in Pakistan and who could just roam around like normal people. And I remember, like, it was just fascinating for people to just, be like, okay, like, I remember headlines of English newspapers in Lahore that it's a safe space for dangerous ideas. And the dangerous ideas were, all Muslims are not terrorists, right? So for, and you're just coming to Pakistan to just tell, like, a white journalist from London would just come in to tell us that, we know that all of you are not terrorists right now sitting in the crowd. And people used to clap. So, but during that process, those festivals would happen regularly, supported by some embassy organizations and international donors. But those kind of became those escape areas where, you could just come in, hear people from different parts of the world. And that in itself was a big thing for Pakistan, where every other day in an urban city, you would see a bomb blast happening. Yeah. And you became desensitized to the fact that if more than 10 people didn't die in an attack, it wouldn't even make it to the news cycle. So in that context, for me, as someone who was obsessed with history, I come from Lahore, and Lahore in 1974 hosted this Islamic summit, which was kind of a sister to the Bandung Conference and the Afro-Asian Havana Conference and the Colombo Conference that happened. So the idea was that in 74 that the Muslim countries, mostly from Africa and Asia, would form a third bloc parallel to like the non-aligned movement, and heads of states from all over came in, and then during that process, we named one of our biggest parks in Egypt's leader's name, Jamal Abdel Nasser, which is called the Nasser Park, and we named our largest cricket stadium the Gaddafi Stadium. Okay. And I just used to look back to that conference where, the world came in, and Idi Amin had a big FOMO that he was not invited, so he came unannounced with an entourage of 300 people. Drama. And the state didn't know where to like host him. Yeah. So in that context, it was always for me that, okay, like, how can Lahore kind of, go back to that era of hosting people, and to me that escaped the third space, that where I could escape to and have these people come together. That's what essentially led to the idea of starting the Indus Conclave. And the idea for naming it against the river Indus also came from the fact that like the Indus is the nature's way of connecting Pakistan to the world, because the river flows into the ocean, and that's what essentially connects us to the shores of Mombasa. So essentially that was the idea, to kind of make that connection that nature had with Pakistan to the world, and to make that forum where people from different parts of the world can come to Pakistan, and also Pakistanis can then also be platformed in other in other countries, and hopefully we don't have to start with the caveat that we're not terrorists.
Exactly.
Yes. So and I came here last year. I found out that Nairobi is happening, and I ran into Angela, and I just asked her to come over to Lahore. And then
she does hold on you since then.
Yes.
That's how she does it,
Yeah.
So I met her at Accion, then we broke up in Trinidad, and here I am now. And I know she's not going to get rid of me for life now. So, yeah, but thank you for that background. And I hope you're making notes of all the organizations mentioned, so that, because we can't go down into the deep details of the amazing work that each one is doing. So you can take the time, follow them online. I'm going to check my socials, Jamaica Book Festival, for follows, right? And then you follow all of the different organizations mentioned. So coming to you, Njeri, Kenyan operating in your space. Tell me what third space looks like for you here and how it connects with your current work.
I think...
You good?
Yeah. Can you hear me? I think, and whenever I think about third spaces, it's a very personal story for each person, I think.
Yes.
And for me, when I start thinking about third spaces, a lot of them are artistic spaces.
Okay.
And especially in high school.
Nice.
I wasn't like what you would call a very studious student.
So you weren't the front of the class?
No. But I was very keen on music classes, art classes, and that's where I gravitated towards. I'm also a very introverted human being, so those spaces were very welcoming and made me feel like I belonged.
Yes.
And also lucky for me, the instructors and the teachers that I was acquainted with were also quite welcoming and made me feel valued as well. And what I've come to understand also about artistic spaces, for me especially, is that once you enter these spaces, you don't have to, it doesn't feel like a performance. You
can turn up as yourself.
Exactly, just turn up as yourself, and also just take a bit of time to acclimatize and understand who you want to be in that space. And so music and art has been a very big part of me. And so as I left university, I got really lucky and got with a group of friends who are now my friends, a collective called the Nest Collective, which is a group of people who've come together to work on films, to work on music, to work on exhibitions, literature, and we've done quite a bit of that for about 10 years now.
Are these people mainly women?
Men and women.
Men and women. What would you say the gender dynamic is like?
Maybe 70% women.
Okay.
Yes, but they're a very intentional group, and that's how actually I know of Angela and Shiro.
Okay.
Because we've done quite a number of things with the Book Bank as the Nest Collective, but also because the collective is super intentional about the themes that we focus on, especially in the work that we do, in the bodies of work that we do, which is around feminism, which is around queerness, which is around blackness. And so for every piece of work that we make, we try to be able to bring that out and highlight that. And so when we were thinking through, we were making music and we're thinking through what kind of experiences would we want that to look like.
Right.
When we were putting out our music, where some of us had also become DJs, and we were thinking through what kind of experiences would we want that to look like. As the women of the collective also, as producers, as queer women in the collective, we were trying to think of also the kinds of experiences that we've had when we've attended certain clubs, we've been to festivals, different festivals, and what kind of an experience we'd want to have. And we just thought, why not host an event where it's just organized by the women of the collective, and also just invite women, trans women, non-binary folk, a queer affirming space. And to be honest, we honestly thought it would be just maybe 100 of our friends.
Yeah. You think it would just be a handful?
Exactly, a handful of friends. And we even got a really small venue. And the logic behind it was also just to create a space where you would come with your friends, come experience joy, come experience care, and we intentionally put one of our main core values for that was safety. And not just safety physically, but safety mentally, psychologically, in terms of care. And even when we were thinking through the performers who'd come and host and perform at the event, security, catering, all that, we were very intentional about making sure that whenever people step into this space, they feel as though they are wanted. They feel as though they're seen and heard, because visibility is also one of our core values as well, which also goes back to belonging. And so, that's how Strictly Silk came to be.
Amazing. Like everything we've heard so far. Really love it. So in the interest of time, I'll now kind of shift the conversation to look at you've all shared your personal stories of how you came to understand third space and find it for yourselves, and then you have now created for others. Now I want us to step outside of of what you've done, the progressive steps you've taken, and let's look at third spaces in general, right? Because third spaces can be organic, but there's also a kind of place in terms of how we develop the built environment to think about third spaces. So libraries, halls, like the church hall that Shani told me about selling patties in South London, right? What do we think is the state of, that part of it? We have a very tight time. I think they cut off some, but we'll work with it. But let's talk about the current state of third spaces. Outside of what you've created, what's your take on what's happening from a public policy interfacing with culture and society standpoint? Lola, you want to give some thoughts on that?
Hello. Right. We don't have nearly as many third spaces as we ought to have.
Yeah.
And a lot of that has to do with the environment that many of us live in. Just listening to everyone's stories, you can tell that you're not getting the support that you need a lot of the time to create a third space.
Correct.
A lot of third spaces are driven by individual conviction, sense of duty, your interest in creating a space where others feel comfortable, where they can be creative. And it can be a lonely road because the sort of funding that you need to really carry it and to build the infrastructure that actually makes it work well often isn't there.
Yeah.
And you're left scrambling and often taxing yourselves to sustain it.
Do you think that some of that is disconnection by design?
I beg your pardon?
Do you think some of that, in terms of talking about the built environment and the role it has to play in not just depending on individuals to create these spaces, do you think there's a kind of dynamic, maybe driven by capitalism or whatever, where there's a focus on, building what doubles the capital and less focus on places that nurture connection? Perhaps a move to de-radicalize the middle class, the working class. So taking it back to the Caribbean, we had a lot of social halls and spaces that would have nurtured thinkers like Marcus Garvey, like Walter Rodney in his Groundings with My Brothers, etc. But now when you look at the environment let's start with Kingston, in my hometown, there are no more apartments and all different kind of infrastructure, and at what seems like a deliberate underinvestment in places like libraries, which can be reimagined and transformed. So I'm kind of wondering your take on whether policymakers, for example, are just oblivious to this, or is there some kind of tension happening there between things like urban redevelopment and, not nurturing these third spaces?
I think a lot of it has to do with priorities.
Yeah.
What they prioritize, what they think is important. But there's also a bit of ignorance. It's not fully understanding the role and the sort of meaningful contributions of these third spaces to society.
Right.
And it's important also to note that a lot of the time, these third spaces, I talked a little earlier about who drives them, but they're often filling a gap.
Of course.
They're filling a gap. They're playing a role that no one was playing, and so a lot of it is building, is finding ways yourself of being able to nurture those very people.
And keep it sustainable.
Yeah.
So I'll come to just do some 3 quick comments going across. starting with you, Njeri, and going all the way down to Tunde. Your thoughts on that? Or if you have anything that you want to add new as we wrap up.
Yeah, I was just going to add to what Lola said in terms of third spaces essentially come because of a lack of. You feel you're looking for spaces that you can belong to, that give you value. And so then you build communities in those spaces. And when you think about capitalism, and especially this is an article a friend of mine just sent me the other day, in the sense that capitalism does not thrive when third spaces are there, because we don't want communities. And then also we've come into a place where when you build communities, people are grounded together. Mm-hmm. And so when that happens, loneliness also, it's not something that builds or thrives on capitalism. And so I feel like third spaces are also built on environments that see them as very informal. So they're not taken seriously. So there's that lack of understanding.
Right.
And with that lack of understanding, and also because you need to build trust, to build community. And if you're not able to do that, a lot of institutions also don't understand that this takes a bit of time.
Exactly. I'm sorry to have to,
yes,
be the bad person and stop the flow of ideas there, but let me just get 2 quick comments from Raza and Tunde.
Yeah, just to add on, I think on 2 levels. One, at like a political level, there is a crisis of imagination, where even there's one particular party which would push for like some more of a authoritarian capitalistic idea of let's not perhaps build public spaces where people can congregate and conspire against the government or share their ideas. But then the opposition parties or any resisting force is also not being able to capture people's imagination in that way. And I think what we've seen over the last 15, 16 years especially is that digital space has taken fill that void in where people exchange ideas.
Especially for young people.
Yes, and even organize. We saw how the Arab Spring started from a Facebook group. So people got together there. Subreddits and subreddits work as like a very great way to organize, especially in societies where there's rampant censorship and there's this curtailment on free, expression of ideas. But at the second level, I also feel there's a very big part of the blame is to be put on education institutions as well, how they kind of deliberately put this idea of public engagement in a very siloed way, where you now only engage with people from your own school, from your own class, from your own neighborhoods, and this idea of public congregation does not exist, at least from parts of the world where I come from.
That's a conversation we can have another panel by itself.
Yeah. So I think that contributes in, because those people who come through those institutions then go into these that mindset that that the society needs to be put into these compartmentalized boxes. So I feel like fundamentally it is a crisis of imagination, which is why we saw these public halls being built in the earlier 20th century. It's not like there was a lot of money and everyone was going to school and healthcare was perfect, but we saw those places as a necessity for a functioning society. Correct. But we don't see those spaces as a necessity anymore.
Correct. Tunde?
So I think I'm thinking about it, in these 2 different facets. I think the first one, the way third spaces are perceived politically, it is mostly seen as a nice to have rather than as a standard infrastructure that must exist, right? When you talk about maybe roads, bridges, it makes sense. And I think the reason why a lot of that thinking is so sort of confined within that lens is because it is hard to measure outcomes, right? People are always very keen on what are the data points. Okay, when we do this, how many people does it directly impact? Yep. What is this? What is that? But we forget that the very reason for third spaces, right, is to give belonging. And there's a difference between access and belonging, right? Access is maybe you're creating something and you say, okay, just come into it, right? But belonging is actually like you belong here because when we were thinking about creating this thing, we had you in mind exactly, right? So those 2 things are different, right? So for a lot of the ways in which it is perceived that, oh, it's just a nice to have, is because there are no real tangible ways to sort of like measure impact sometimes, outcomes, right? But in the work that I've done, especially with children, because one thing we do is we go to some of the worst slum communities and we have like makeshift spaces for children to come into that place and learn chess. And I'll give this very final story on how, this comes together. We went to this community called Makoko. It's one of the largest floating slum in the world. It was a community where predominantly they are fishermen. So a lot of the children there do not have access to education, right? There are very few schools there, very few learning spaces. So when we went there, we sort of like talked to the leaders of the community, and they gave us a makeshift center behind the King's Palace to teach the children. So we put chessboards, we invited about 100 children, and we're training them 6 hours every day for about a month. The very second day, there was this kid that came into that space. His name is Ferdinand. This boy living with cerebral palsy. And in that community, for a kid like that has that condition, right? Children can be very mean, and they bully him. They call him imbecile. So he doesn't get to play with the other kids because of the way he walks. He's non-verbal and all of this thing. So I remember when he came on that day, the other children from the entrance, they were literally pushing him away that, no, that, what we're learning here, you cannot, this space is not for you. But thankfully, the kid just stuck around and he just kept watching. So I saw that and I brought him in and I asked, what is your name? He couldn't respond. And I just thought, we've never really had a differently able child, in our chess academies before. So I just put him in a class. And about an hour or two later, the instructor in that class came to me and he was almost in tears. He said, Tunde, you need to see something. So he brought me to the table. So one of the first sessions we have for the kids where we introduce them to like board notation and geometry is putting the knight piece on one end of the board and finding the least number of mathematical possibilities to get to the other end of the board. For context, after the first 4 moves in the game of chess, the number of possible ways in which the game can be played is more than the number of atoms in the universe. So there's a lot of like very complex thinking that would help you precisely know how that knight can get there in the least possible number of moves. And this boy was the only one that could solve it. And in doing that, chess sort of like became his first language of experience, of expression, because he was a gifted child that did not know how to express what was going on internally in the world. But in that introduction in that class and finding a place where he could apply his mind, it blossomed. And you could see the smile on his face, when the teacher said they should give him a round of applause. No one had ever done that for him, right? Of course, we continued to observe him. Then we had a tournament, and he won the tournament. And last year, he went to New York and he got a gold medal at the Accion Chess Championship. And the truth is that there are many stories like this where at the beginning it is actually really hard to tangibly explain the benefit, the very essence of this, to people who think within the frame of, data points, this and that, outcomes, impact, and all of that. It does take time for these things to become evident. So I think if we put a lot of work into framing it in these ways, it explains the very essence, the very soul of why these spaces matter. Because chess, is a language, like love, like music. And for me, sort of like thinking about the spaces for children to come, to belong, is to know that them belonging here isn't going to be a measure of how intelligent you are, how able you are in that sense. You belong here because this place was created with you in mind. And as long as that it is important enough, then it matters and it has to exist in the world as well.
Wow. Honestly, I couldn't think of a better story to kind of wrap up our discussion. Clearly, you see that all of us can talk for another 5 hours, but based on, the timing and we're a little bit behind, we're gonna close out our segment. Very powerful story to illustrate the importance, the necessity of third spaces, and especially when you think about points like inclusion, access, etc. And so I'm hoping that for you, the audience, that you have learned something from each story that's shared, that you will go and connect with these organizations, because you're in a third space right now. But when you leave here, are you gonna go sit in front of a computer and order from that place? We'll start with A, right? Spend most of your time doing that. What are you gonna do in terms of either creating your own third space or supporting one that exists? Because we don't always have to start the work from scratch, right? We can always give support to other things. So that's really what I want to leave you with today, and to thank the organizers for inviting me here all the way from Jamaica. Thank you. Very grateful for the warm reception from Kenya, and to thank my panelists, Lola, Njeri, Raza, Tunde, for your incredible work and for sharing with us this afternoon. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Please do not leave the stage. We need to take a great picture of this panel. If you could just step up to the front. Lola Shoneyin, Njeri, DJ Ziggie, Gitungo, Tunde Onakoya, Mohammed Raza, and Latoya Blackwood, everyone. A round of applause for them. All right, one more picture with your flowers. With your flowers. Don't forget, if you want any of your books signed, Lola, of course, is an author. Baba Segi's Wives. Have you read that book? Of course you have. If you haven't had your copy signed, she's going to sign that for you at the marketplace. On a children's book as well. Lola got plenty books. Oh, hold on.
So last year, after begging Tunde for many years and saying, Tunde, your story is amazing. I want to write about your life. I want everyone to know how you've become this incredible young person. So I chased him, and I did track him down, and we started talking, and we worked together. We had conversations, and I went back and I wrote him.